Is it actually over for Joe Biden? I think it's a question we're all asking ourselves. Maybe you were like me and you didn't want Joe Biden to begin with. I think it's easier for people in our situation to argue that he should drop out. But then the question remains, who would replace him? We're going to take a look at who is making the arguments for him to step aside, but also who would replace him. And there's one thing that broke today that I think might inform whether or not he will drop out, so stay tuned for that. One of the most impactful arguments for Joe Biden to drop out came from the New York Times editorial board. This came a day after the debate, and if you need any reminder of how poorly Joe Biden performed, here you go.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
Immediately following that debate, the New York Times editorial board made the argument that he should step aside to better serve the country. They recognize the threat that Trump poses. And I think even if you don't like Biden, you can still recognize that, especially after the immunity decision and the looming Project 2025. If you don't know what Project 2025 is, you should look it up, but a really quick primer, it is several hundred pages compiled by right-wing interest groups, laying out exactly what Trump should do if he takes office. Within that, it's an argument to gut the federal government, replace civil servants with political appointees, but also make a blacklist of people who might stand in the way of Trump. The government as you know it will be completely transformed. And you might not think that'll impact you directly, but I promise you, it will. Because corporations are going to be able to do whatever they want. Real quick, before we continue, please be sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's get back to it. But in this New York Times editorial, the clearest path for Democrats to defeat a candidate defined by his lies is to deal truthfully with the American public. Acknowledge that Mr. Biden can't continue his race and create a process to select someone more capable to stand in his place to defeat Mr. Trump in November. It is the best chance to protect the soul of the nation. The cause that drew Mr. Biden to run for the presidency in 2019 from the malign warping of Mr. Trump, and it is the best service that Mr. Biden can provide to a country that he has nobly served for so long. The New York Times, whatever you think of it, does carry a lot of weight, especially in Democratic circles. It's the paper of record. For them to follow the debate the very next day and publicly call for him to step aside is a big deal. Then you also have the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Their editorial board also called for him to step aside. And a whole slew of prominent liberal columnists joined that chorus. People you wouldn't otherwise think of throwing a Democrat, especially the president, under the bus like this. From Thomas Friedman to Nick Kristof, to Paul Krugman, to David Remnick. These are people who are typically going to defend a liberal status quo. But the one that really stood out to me was Ezra Klein. He pointed out that Democrats are doing a disservice to their own voters, writing, "But rather than act as a check on Biden's decisions and ambitions, the party has become an enabler of them, an enforcer of them. It is giving the American people an option they do not want and then threatening them with the end of democracy if they do not take it. Democrats like to say that democracy is on the ballot, but it isn't. Biden is on the ballot. There are plenty of voters who want to vote for democracy, but do not want to vote for Biden. That's why we see Democratic Senate candidates running well ahead of him in key states." And there are two things I want to pull from here. First, they frame this as the most important election of our lives, and democracy is on the line. And while some of that commentary typically is hyperbolic, there are serious consequences. Think back to Project 2025, like I just talked about, and the Supreme Court's immunity decision. Do you really want to risk handing over the presidency to Trump after that decision and with Project 2025's playbook in hand? I would argue most rational people don't want that. The point is, you shouldn't just be completely ironic or nihilistic about it. There are consequences to elections. You can still think that a two-party system or electoralism isn't the way to achieve a better society. But unfortunately, that's the world we're living in, and that is the only way that you can prevent further damage. I'm not an accelerationist. Some people might be. I think that's misguided. But this is the reality of the circumstance we're living in right now. Those are the terms that we have to operate within. It's okay to be a realist about this kind of stuff. But then cracks started to form in the Democratic Party. You had Pelosi who said this.
Now, again, I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
People saw that as an opening for the Democratic Party and leadership to consider replacing Biden. And then you had James Clyburn, who really helped propel Joe Biden to the presidency, saying this.
How would you feel if they worked around and tried to go around Kamala Harris because of her lack of high poll numbers and popularity and broadly based? Do you think it's hers to have if it is not his?
I will support her if he were to step aside.
Again, these cracks are starting to form, and these are people who would never question a Democratic president. But this just shows how bad things have gotten. Meanwhile, Biden's team is doubling down. They had a pep rally call today with campaign staff. Biden insisted he's staying in the race. So to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, who would replace Biden? And what's that one piece of information that might change things? Let's talk about his replacement. The most likely person is Kamala Harris. And I know that's not a surprise, and I know you might be rolling your eyes. People don't seem to like her. And sure, she's goofy. She ran a terrible primary in 2020, but I also don't think that she's as bad as a lot of people think. And I think a lot of the leaks about her performance as vice president might be coming from somebody else in the administration. Maybe a certain transportation secretary who also wants to be next in line. People would always make the case to justify this negative impression that people have. Oh, she polls poorly. People don't like her. Well, she's polling better than Biden now. And when compared to Trump, she's polling almost the same. So getting her on the campaign trail, getting her in front of people, as funny as that may be, could be what helps boost her profile. At this point, I'm willing to take the risk. And again, it would be extremely funny. Just look at some of her greatest hits.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. I love Venn diagrams. I really do. I love Venn diagrams. It's just something about those three circles and the analysis about where there is the intersection, right? Yeah, I see people that you agree with me, right? I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. You know? What can be unburdened by what has been.
It seems like every hour at this point, somebody new is calling for Biden to step aside. While I was recording this, the Boston Globe's editorial board also joined those calls, saying he should step aside. And we can expect more as these days go on. I'm jumping back in while I'm editing this because I just saw that Reed Hastings, who is the Netflix co-founder and a huge Democratic mega donor, said on the record that Biden needs to step aside. There's been a ton of speculation about where the donors are. That's a whole other component to this. But now that he's saying it publicly, does provide cover for other Democrat donors to also come out and say Biden needs to step aside. So this just shows there are going to be more coming. This isn't going away, and these people recognize it's not just one bad night. Democrats are planning on having a virtual nomination process later this month in advance of the convention taking place next month in Chicago. Time is of the essence here. If they really want to beat Trump, they need to do something quick. And what might motivate them is that New York Times Siena poll the Democrats were reportedly trying to get ahead of. They asked voters if the election was held today, who would they support? And among registered voters, Trump got 49%, while Biden only got 41%. That is a 3-point swing just from last week, and it's the largest lead that Trump has had in that poll since 2015. Things are really bad for Biden. And now this poll shows that Trump is as strong as he was in 2015 going into 2016 when he did win. That should send a chill down the spine of anybody who does not want a second Trump presidency. Now, of course, there are candidates they could look at. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, California Governor Gavin Newsom. These are all possibilities. But if they were to make a change, it probably will be Harris, just to keep things as seamless as possible during a transition. I'm not saying it would be easy, but it would be, compared to others, the easiest choice. At this point, people just want something. They want a candidate who can finish a thought. And while she may go off on tangents and say things that we don't understand yet, at least there's somebody who is in a position to push back against Trump in a potential second debate. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are they going to replace Biden? Should they? And if you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I know it's cliche, but it really does help the channel. Thank you.